Enchantress. Enchants neutral creeps to do her bidding. Ayesha appears to be an innocent, carefree creature of the woods, and while this is certainly true, it is hardly the sum of her story. She well understands the suffering of the natural world. She has wandered far and fared through forests bright and drear, in every clime and every season, gathering friends, sharing news, bringing laughter and healing wherever she goes. For in worlds racked by war, forests are leveled for the building of ships and siege engines, and even in places of peace, the woods are stripped for the building of homes, and as fuel for countless hearths. Ayesha hears the pleas of the small creatures, the furtive folk who need green shade and a leafy canopy to thrive. She lends her ears to those who have no other listeners. She carries their stories from the wood to the world, believing that her own good cheer is a kind of enchantment that can itself fulfill the promise of a verdant future. Chaos Knight. Has strong but random damage output. The veteran of countless battles on 1,000 worlds, Chaos Knight hails from a far upstream plane where the fundamental laws of the universe have found sentient expression. Of all the ancient fundamentals, he is the oldest and most tireless, endlessly searching out a being he knows only as the light. Long ago the light ventured out from the progenitor realm, in defiance of the first covenant. Now Chaos Knight shifts from plane to plane, always on the hunt to extinguish the light wherever he finds it. 1,000 times he has snuffed out the source, and always he slides into another plane to continue his search anew. Upon his steed Armageddon he rides, wading into battle with maniacal frenzy, drawing strength from the disorder of the universe. A physical manifestation of chaos itself, in times of need he calls upon other versions of himself from other planes, and together these dark horsemen ride into battle, as unstoppable as any force of nature. Only when the last light of the world is scoured from existence will the search be ended. Where rides the Chaos Knight, death soon follows. Brewmaster. Splits into 3 elemental spirits with unique abilities. Deep in the Wailing Mountains, in a valley beneath the ruined city, the ancient order of the Oyo has for centuries practiced its rites of holy reverie, communing with the spirit realm in grand festivals of drink. Born to a mother's flesh by a celestial father, the youth known as Mangix was the first to grow up with the talents of both lineages. He trained with the greatest aesthetes of the order, eventually earning, through diligent drunkenness, the right to challenge for the title of brewmaster, that appellation most honored among the contemplative malt brewing sect. As much drinking competition as mortal combat, Mangix for 9 days drank and fought the elder master. For 9 nights they stumbled and whirled, chugged and struck, until at last the elder warrior collapsed into a drunken stupor, and a new brewmaster was named. Now the new, young brewmaster calls upon the strength of his Oyo forebears to speed his staff. When using magic, it is to his spirit ancestors that he turns. Like all brewmasters before him, he was sent out from his people with a single mission. He wanders the land, striving toward enlightenment through drink, searching for the answer to the ancient spiritual schism. Hoping to think the single thought that will unite the spirit and physical planes again. Broodmother. Hunts with her army of spiderlings. For centuries, Black Arachnia the broodmother lurked in the dark lava tubes beneath the smoldering caldera of Mount Pyrotheos, raising millions of spiderlings in safety before sending them to find prey in the wide world above. In a later age, the Vizier of Greed, Tolopthales, erected his lodestone ziggurat on the slopes of the dead volcano, knowing that any looters who sought his magnetic wealth must survive the spider-haunted passages. After millennia of maternal peace, Black Arachnia found herself beset by a steady trickle of fur feet and cut purses, bold knights and noble youths, all of them delicious, certainly, and yet tending to create a less than nurturing environment for her innocent offspring. Tiring of the intrusions, she paid a visit to Tolopthales, and when he proved unwilling to discuss a compromise, she wrapped the vizier in silk and set him aside to be the centerpiece of a special birthday feast. Unfortunately, the absence of the magnetic ziggurat's master merely emboldened a new generation of intruders. When one of her newborns was trodden underfoot by a clumsy adventurer, she reached the end of her silken rope. Broodmother headed for the surface, declaring her intent to rid the world of each and every possible invader, down to the last hero if necessary, until she could ensure her nursery might once more be a safe and wholesome environment for her precious spider spawn. Necrophos. Damages enemies and heals allies simultaneously. In a time of great plague, an obscure monk of dark inclinations, one Rotungeri, found himself promoted to the rank of cardinal by the swift death of all his superiors. While others of the order went out to succor the ill, the newly ordained cardinal secluded himself within the cathedral of Ramusk, busily scheming to acquire the property of dying nobles, promising them spiritual rewards if they signed over their terrestrial domains. As the plague receded to a few stubborn pockets, his behavior came to the attention of the greater order, which found him guilty of heresy and sentenced him to serve in the plague ward, ensorcelled with spells that would ensure him a slow and lingering illness. But they had not counted on his natural immunity. Rotungeri caught the pox, but instead of dying, found it feeding his power, transforming him into a veritable plague mage, a pope of pestilence. Proclaiming himself Necrophos, he travels the world, spreading plague wherever he goes, and growing in terrible power with every village his pestilential presence obliterates. Monkey King. Springs from the cover of the treetops. For 500 years the mountain pressed down upon him, only his head free from the crushing weight of the stone-wrought prison the elder gods had summoned to halt his childish rebellion. Moss grew along the lines of his exposed face, tufts of grass sprouted from his ears. His vision was framed in wildflowers reaching from the soil around his cheeks. Most thought him long dead, tormented by the gods for waging war against the heavens until naught but his legend survived. But, as the stories go, the Monkey King cannot die. So he waited. Until the gods came to offer a chance at absolution, he endured. And when they did come to name the price, Sun Wukong accepted their charge. He would accompany a young acolyte on a secret pilgrimage, protect him from demons and dangers of the road, and guide the man home in possession of a coveted relic. Do that, and humbly obey the humans' commands in service to their holy mission, and Wukong would prove himself reformed. For a change, Sun Wukong fulfilled his oath to the gods with honor, and atoned for the sins of past insurrections. The acolyte, much learned in hardships, was returned to his home temple, relic in hand, and Wukong, finding himself for the first time in proper standing with any gods of consequence, was content for a short while to give up his old thirst for adventure and glory. But the Monkey King was born for mischief, and offending the gods never gets old. Medusa. Immobilizes her enemies with her stone gaze. Beauty is power. This thought comforted Medusa, the youngest and loveliest of three beautiful Gorgon sisters, born to a sea goddess because she alone of the sisters was mortal. It comforted her, that is, until the day masked assailants invaded the Gorgon realm and tore the two immortal sisters from their home, unmoved by their beauty or by their tears. One of the invaders seized Medusa as well, but then cast her aside with a disgusted look. This one has the mortal stink upon her. We have no use for that which dies. Humiliated, enraged, Medusa fled to the temple of her mother and cast herself before the goddess, crying, "You denied me eternal life, therefore I beg you, give me power. Power, so I can dedicate what life I have to rescuing my sisters and avenging this injustice." After long thought, the goddess granted her daughter's request, allowing Medusa to trade her legendary beauty for a face and form of terrifying strength. Never for a moment has Medusa regretted her choice. She understands that power is the only beauty worth possessing, for only power can change the world. Lena. Increases attack and speed with every spell. The sibling rivalries between Lena the Slayer and her younger sister Rylai, the Crystal Maiden, were the stuff of legend in the temperate region where they spent their quarrelsome childhoods together. Lena always had the advantage, however, for while Crystal was guileless and naive, Lena's fiery ardor was tempered by cleverness and conniving. The exasperated parents of these incompatible offspring went through half a dozen homesteads, losing one to fire, the next to ice, before they realized life would be simpler if the children were separated. As the oldest, Lena was sent far south to live with a patient aunt in the blazing desert of Misrule, a climate that proved more than comfortable for the fiery slayer. Her arrival made quite an impression on the somnolent locals, and more than one would-be suitor scorched his fingers or went away with singed eyebrows, his advances spurned. Lena is proud and confident, and nothing can dampen her flame. Phantom Assassin blinks onto her foes with critical strikes. Through a process of divination, children are selected for upbringing by the Sisters of the Veil, an order that considers assassination a sacred part of the natural order. The Veiled Sisters identify targets through meditation and oracular utterances. They accept no contracts, and never seem to pursue targets for political or mercenary reasons. Their killings bear no relation to any recognizable agenda, and can seem to be completely random. A figure of great power is no more likely to be eliminated than a peasant or a well-digger. Whatever pattern the killings may contain, it is known only to them. They treat their victims as sacrifices, and death at their hand is considered an honor. Raised with no identity except that of their order, any phantom assassin can take the place of any other. Their number is not known. Perhaps there are many, perhaps there are few. Nothing is known of what lies under the phantom veil. Except that this one, from time to time, when none are near enough to hear, is known to stir her veils with the forbidden whisper of her own name, Mortred. Meepo. 5 are stronger than 1. If you ask me, life is all about who you know and what you can find. When you live up in the Rift Shadow ruins, just finding food can be tough. So you need to cut corners, you need to scrounge, you need to know your strengths. Some of the beasts up there can kill you, so you need a way to trap the weak and duck the strong. On the upside, the ruins have history, and history is worth a lot to some people. There used to be a palace there, where they had all these dark rituals. Bad stuff. If you survived the ceremony, they would shatter a crystal and split your soul into pieces. They made great art though. Sculptures and such. Let me tell you, sometimes you stumble onto some of those old carvings. Take a pack full of those to town and sell them, then get yourself food for a few weeks. If luck is really on your side, you might find a Rift Shadow crystal. Get it appraised and start asking around. Someone always knows some crazy fool looking for this kind of thing. If all else fails, sell it to a magus the next time one's in town. They love that stuff. Still, whatever you do, be careful handling those crystals. You do not want one to go off on you. It really hurts. Magnus charges in to reposition his enemies. The mastersmiths of Imp Jorlak agree on only a single point, that the horn of a Magnaceros is more precious than any alloy. And of all such horns, the largest and sharpest belongs to the beast they call Magnus. For half a generation, Magnus took easy sport goring hunters come to claim the treasures of his kin. Each time he would return to his cave with hooves and horns stained red, until his matriarch urged him and all their kin to seek refuge to the north beyond the shadow of the mountain. But Magnus scoffed, having never failed to defend his people. The Magnosauroi would stay, he decided, for a Magnaceros does not believe in chance, nor does it ever change its mind. But when Jorlak erupted without warning, and half his kin perished in the fire and ash, Magnus changed his mind after all. The survivors pushed north, until they reached a blockade watched over by 100 hunters armed with bow and steel. Magnus expected no less. He led his fiercest brothers and sisters in a charge against their enemies, and fought with a ferocity matched only by the fire-spewing mountain at his back. Meanwhile the Magnaceros' elders, mothers, and calves vanished into the drifts. The mastersmiths are divided about what happened next. Some say Magnus reunited with his kin, while others claim he suffered mortal injuries and expired alongside the body of his matriarch. Neither theory is correct. Magnus did vow to rejoin his kin, but only after seeking out those responsible for the eruption of Imp Jorlak and watching them die upon his horn, for a Magnaceros does not believe in chance. Sniper. Picks off his enemies from afar. Cardinal Sharp Eye was born deep in the mountains of Noland where, since time immemorial, keen folk have survived by hunting the strange, cliff-dwelling steep-stalkers above their village, shooting them from a distance and collecting the carcasses where they fell. Sharp Eye was among the best of these strange mountain keens for whom projectile weapons are but another appendage, and to shoot is as natural as to touch. On his day of summoning, when he was to gain full standing in his village, Sharp Eye took the ancient test, a single shot from the valley floor to strike a beast down from the cliffs. To miss was to be dishonored. With his entire village standing vigil, Sharp Eye took his shot. A steep stalker fell, the crowd cheered. But when the carcass was collected, the village grew silent, for the elders found that the bullet had pierced its glittering central eye then fallen to be clenched in the steep stalker's mandibles. This ominous sign was the literal opening of a dark prophecy, foretelling both greatness and exile for the gunman who made such a shot. Sharp Eye the sniper was thus, by his own skill, condemned to make his way apart from his people and unwelcome back among them until he has fulfilled the remainder of the prophecy by attaining legendary stature on a field of battle. Sven. Cleaves down enemies with his incredible strength. Sven is the bastard son of a vigil knight, born of a pallid Marinth, raised in the Shadeshore ruins. With his father executed for violating the Vigil Codex, and his mother shunned by her wild race, Sven believes that honor is to be found in no social order, but only in himself. After tending his mother through a lingering death, he offered himself as a novice to the Vigil Knights, never revealing his identity. For 13 years he studied in his father's school, mastering the rigid code that declared his existence an abomination. Then, on the day that should have been his inswearing, he seized the outcast blade, shattered the sacred helm, and burned the codex in the Vigil's holy flame. He strode from Vigil Keep, forever solitary, following his private code to the last strict rune. Still a knight, yes, but a rogue knight. He answers only to himself. Spectre. Haunts her enemies and teleports to her target. Just as higher states of energy seek a lower level, the spectre known as Mercurial is a being of intense and violent energy who finds herself irresistibly drawn to scenes of strife as they unfold in the physical world. While her normal spectral state transcends sensory limitations, each time she takes on a physical manifestation, she is stricken by a loss of self though not of purpose. In the clash of combat, her identity shatters and reconfigures, and she begins to regain awareness. She grasps that she is Mercurial the Spectre and that all of her haunts are but shadows of the one true Spectre. Focus comes in the struggle for survival, her true mind reasserts itself, until in the final moments of victory or defeat, she transcends matter and is restored once more to her eternal form. Snapfire. Mows down her enemies with heavy artillery and trusty lizard. Beatrix Snapfire and her dragon-toad Mortimer are a welcome sight to the ragged folk who scratch out lives along the desert routes and oases scattered throughout Nanarak, the rain-forsaken gateway to the Outlands. As well known for her unrivaled skills as a weaponsmith as for dispensing wisdom, mirth, and the meanest fire snap cookies the world has ever seen, Beatty survived to a ripe old age in a young keen's trade by being quick with her wits and even quicker with her guns. Indeed, the Outlands are littered with the bones of bandits and ne'er-do-wells who thought to take advantage of her small stature and propensity for kindness. Spirit Breaker. Charges down enemies from anywhere on the map. Barathram the Spirit Breaker is a lordly and powerful being, a fierce and elemental intelligence which chose to planeshift into the world of matter to take part in events with repercussions in the elemental realm that is his home. To that end, he assembled a form that would serve him well, both in our world and out of it. His physical form borrows from the strengths of this world, blending features both bovine and simian horns, hooves and hands as outward emblems of his inner qualities of strength, speed and cunning. He wears a ring in his nose, as a reminder that he serves a hidden master, and that this world in which he works is but a shadow of the real one. Sand King. Burrows to stun and slow enemies. The sands of the scintillant waste are alive and sentient. The whole vast desert speaks to itself, thinking thoughts only such a vastness can conceive. But when it needs must find a form to communicate with those of more limited scope, it frees a fragment of itself, and fills a carapace of magic armor formed by the cunning Jinn of Kaldin. This essential identity calls itself Crixalis, meaning soul of the sand, but others know it as Sand King. Sand King takes the form of a huge arachnid, inspired by the scintillant waste's small but ubiquitous denizens, and this is a true outward expression of his ferocious nature. Guardian, warrior, ambassador Sand King is all of these things, inseparable from the endless desert that gave him life. Ursa deals more damage with every hit to the same foe. Ulfsar the warrior is the fiercest member of an Ursine tribe, protective of his land and his people. During the long winters, while the mothers sleep and nurse their cubs, the males patrol the lands above as tireless, vigilant defenders of their ancient ways. Hearing dim but growing rumors of a spreading evil, Ulfsar headed out beyond the boundaries of his wild wooded homeland, intending to track down and destroy the threat at its source, before it could endanger his people. He is a proud creature with a bright, strong spirit, utterly trustworthy, a staunch ally and defender. Viper. Poisonous toxins chip away armor and slow enemies. The malevolent familiar of a sadistic wizard who captured and hoped to tame him, Viper was curiously glad to have been sprung from the sealed and unchanging subterranean nether reaches where his race had lived for millions of years, after tectonic slippage had sealed off the netherdrakes in luminous caverns. Viper spent some time appearing to submit to the wizard's enchainments, hoping to learn what he could of the dark magics the mage practiced. But he soon realized that few spells were as deadly as the toxins that were his birthright. Exuding an acid that swiftly ate away the bars of his cage, the netherdrake slipped free of his confines, spit poison in the old spellcaster's eyes, and soared out to let the world know that it had a new master. Vengeful Spirit can swap herself with any nearby hero. Even the most contented Skywrath is an ill-tempered creature, naturally inclined to seek revenge for the slightest insult. But Vengeful Spirit is the essence of vengeance. Once a proud and savage Skywrath scion, Shendelzare was first in succession for the ghastly Aerie until a sister's treachery robbed her of her birthright. Snared in an assassin's net, Shendelzare tore free only at the cost of her wings, limping away in the ultimate humiliation, on foot. With her wings broken, she knew the Skywrath would never accept her as ruler, and in the highest roost of the Aerie, inaccessible except by winged flight, her sister was untouchable. Unwilling to live as a flightless cripple, and desiring revenge far more than earthly power, the fallen princess drove a bargain with the goddess Skriok. She surrendered her broken body for an imperishable form of spirit energy, driven by vengeance, capable of doing great damage in the material plane. She may spend eternity flightless, but she will have her revenge. Visage scouts and attacks with his familiars. Perched atop the entrance to the narrow maze sit the looming shapes of sneering gargoyles, the paths into the hereafter forever in their gaze. Beasts and birds, men and monsters, all creatures that die and choose to travel beyond must someday pass beneath their sight. For an untethered spirit, the decision to journey through the veil of death is irrevocable. When chance comes, and by craft or cunning some restless soul escapes their hells and heavens, it is the dreaded gargoyle Visage, the bound form of the eternal spirit Necrolik, who is dispatched to reclaim them. Ruthless and efficient, unhindered by the principles of death and fatigue, Visage stalks its prey without mercy or end, willingly destroying all which may give shelter to the fugitive essence. That which flaunts the laws of the afterlife may never rest, for while it is true that the dead may be revived, it is only a matter of time before Visage finds and returns them to their proper place. Windranger fires swift flurry of arrows at a single target. The western forests guard their secrets well. One of these is Lyrelii, master archer of the wood, and favored godchild of the wind. Known now as Windranger, Lyrelii's family was killed in a storm on the night of her birth, their house blown down by the gale, contents scattered to the winds. Only the newborn survived among the debris field of death and destruction. In the quiet after the storm, the wind itself took notice of the lucky infant crying in the grass. The wind pitied the child and so lifted her into the sky and deposited her on a doorstep in a neighboring village. In the years that followed, the wind returned occasionally to the child's life, watching from a distance while she honed her skills. Now, after many years of training, Wind Ranger fires her arrows true to their targets. She moves with blinding speed, as if hastened by a wind ever at her back. With a flurry of arrows, she slaughters her enemies, having become, nearly, a force of nature herself. Witch Doctor channels a high-damage death ward. A wiry silhouette hitches forward uneven of feature and limb, bizarre of gait, relentlessly crisscrossing the battlefield in search of that vital weak point where his talents can do most good and most harm. Whether broken or mismade it is not clear, but still, none can doubt the power carried in his twisted physique. A long staff thumps the earth as Zarvako the Witch Doctor advances, deploying a terrifying arsenal of fetishes, hexes and spells. It is a body of magical knowledge learned and perfected over several lifetimes in the island highlands of Arctura, now wielded with precision accuracy against his enemies. Zarvako can be your best friend or your worst enemy, healing allies and laying waste to all who oppose him. Venomancer deals damage over time with venomous attacks. In the acid jungles of GD Isle, poison runs in the veins and bubbles in the guts of every creature that scuttles, climbs or swoops between fluorescent vines dripping with caustic sap. Yet even in this toxic menagerie, Venomancer is acknowledged as the most venomous. Ages ago, an herbalist named Lesail crossed the Bay of Frage by coracle, searching for potent essences that might be extracted from bark and root, and found instead a nightmare transformation. 2 leagues into GD's jungle, Lesail encountered a reptile camouflaged as an epiphyte, which stung him as he mistakenly plucked it. In desperation, he used his partial knowledge of the jungle's herbal bounty, mixing the venom of the swiftly throttled reptile with the nectar of an armored orchid to compound an antidote. In the moments before a black paralysis claimed him completely, he injected himself by orchid thorn and instantly fell into a coma. 17 years later, something stirred in the spot where he had fallen, throwing off the year's accumulation of humus, Venomancer. Lesail the herbalist no longer but Lesail the Deathbringer. His mind was all but erased, and his flesh had been consumed and replaced by a new type of matter, one fusing the venom of the reptile with the poisonous integument of the orchid. GD's acid jungles knew a new master, one before whom even the most vicious predators soon learned to bow or burrow for their lives. The lurid isle proved too confining, and some human hunger deep in the heart of the Venomancer drove Lesail out in search of new poisons and new deaths to bring. Bloodseeker chases down low-health enemies with increased speed. Strygwyr the Bloodseeker is a ritually sanctioned hunter, hound of the flayed twins, sent down from the mist-shrouded peaks of Zakatakat in search of blood. The flayed ones require oceanic amounts of blood to keep them sated and placated, and would soon drain their mountain empire of its populace if the priests of the high plateaus did not appease them. Strygwyr therefore goes out in search of carnage. The vital energy of any blood he lets flows immediately to the twins through the sacred markings on his weapons and armor. Over the years, he has come to embody the energy of a vicious hound. In battle he is savage as a jackal. Beneath the mask of the Bloodseeker, in the rush of bloody quenching, it is said that you can sometimes see the features of the flayers taking direct possession of their hound. Beastmaster summons beasts to aid his hunt. Carrick was born a child of the Stalks. His mother died in childbirth. His father, a farrier for the last king of Slom, was trampled to death when he was 5. Afterward Carrick was indentured to the king's menagerie, where he grew up among all the beasts of the royal court, lions, apes, fell deer, and things less known, things barely believed in. When the lad was 7, an explorer brought in a beast like none before seen. Dragged before the king in chains, the beast spoke, though its mouth moved not. Its words, a plea for freedom. The king only laughed and ordered the beast perform for his amusement, and when it refused, struck it with the mad scepter and ordered it dragged to the stocks. Over the coming months, the boy Carrick sneaked food and medicinal drafts to the wounded creature, but only managed to slow its deterioration. Wordlessly, the beast spoke to the boy, and over time their bond strengthened until the boy found he could hold up his end of a conversation. He could, in fact, speak now to all the creatures of the king's menagerie. On the night the beast died, a rage came over the boy. He incited the animals of the court to rebel and threw open their cages to set them amuck on the palace grounds. The last king was mauled in the mayhem. In the chaos, one regal stag bowed to the boy who had freed him, and with Beastmaster astride him, leapt the high walls of the estate and escaped. Now a man, Carrick the Beastmaster has not lost his ability to converse with wild creatures. He has grown into a warrior at one with nature's savagery. Bane puts his enemies to sleep, incapacitating them. When the gods have nightmares, it is Bane Elemental who brings them. Also known as Atropos, Bane was born from the midnight terrors of the goddess Niktasha. A force of terror too powerful to be contained by sleep, he surfaced from her slumbers, fed upon her immortality, and stole his vaporous form from her inky blood. He is the essence of fear. Mortals who hear his voice hear their darkest secrets whispered in their ear. He calls to the hidden fear in every hero's heart. Wakefulness is no protection, for Bane's black blood, continuously dripping, is a tar that traps his enemies in nightmare. In the presence of Bane, every hero remembers to fear the dark. Batrader can lasso an enemy away from his team. There is no such thing as harmony among the creatures of the Yama Raskov jungle. By bite, or claw, or pincer, or hoof, even the slightest sign of weakness means a swift death. They say the rider was just a lad cutting chaff in his family's field when he was taken, swept up by a massive mordbat looking for takeout. But this boy had a better idea, and wriggled his way from his captor's grip, onto the beast's back, and hacked it down with his tools. Emerging from the bloody wreckage and intoxicated by the thrill of flight, the boy realized he'd found his calling. The boy grew, and every summer he'd return to his family's field, often setting out into the bush seeking to reclaim that first thrill of facing death in the form of jaws or a fatal fall. The years went on, but his fire only grew stronger. He studied the overgrowth, plunging deeper with each expedition, until finally he found his way to the caves at the heart of hostility. They say the rider, on the eve of a scorching summer night, had nothing but a rope, a bottle of liquid courage and a burning determination to feel the skies once more, when he plunged inside. Arc Warden creates a copy of himself to split push. Before the beginning of all, there existed a presence, a primordial mind, infinite, awesome, and set to inscrutable purpose. As the universe thundered into being, this mind was fragmented and scattered. Two among its greater fragments who would come to be named Radiant and Dire found themselves locked in vicious opposition, and began twisting all of creation to serve their conflict. As war and cataclysm threatened the nascent cosmos, the will of a third fragment made itself known. Naming itself Zet, this intellect sought to resolve the disharmony and return all to perfect unity. Appalled by its kin's conflicting nature, Zet gathered the sum of its power. In a sudden flash, it overwhelmed its siblings, and fused the warring aspects into a stellar sphere before hurling them into the darkness to orbit a nondescript world. Harmony was restored, though only the barest fraction of Zet's strength remained. Setting its gaze on the prison, Zet chose to use its weakened power to serve as watchful warden until time's end. For uncounted eons, this vigil stood. Life flourished upon the world below, oblivious to the dangers imprisoned within the softly glowing moon, or of Zet's struggles to contain them. As the captive's eternal clash reverberated within, the surface of the prison shuddered, over time beginning to crack. Ultimately, Zet's depleted power proved insufficient to contain the breach, and at last the moon was shattered. The prison's ancient inhabitants had escaped to sow their conflict anew. Flung to the farthest reaches by the prison's explosion, Zet was transformed by the dissonant energies of its former captives. No longer of single form and thought, its presence had become split among many, some lesser, some greater, each connected by a fleeting arc of consciousness. Struggling to suppress its own disunity, Zet sped toward the burgeoning conflict of its siblings, bending its fractured wills toward a singular conclusion. The aspects of the primordial mind must be made to reunite, or all must be destroyed lest the conflict spread further. Ancient Apparition launches a powerful icy blast from anywhere on the map. Kaldr, the Ancient Apparition, is an image projected from outside time. He springs from the cold, infinite void that both predates the universe and awaits its end. Kaldr is, Kaldr was, Kaldr shall be, and what we perceive, powerful as it appears to us, is but the faintest faded echo of the true, eternal Kaldr. Some believe that as the cosmos ages and approaches its final moments, the brightness and power of Kaldr will also intensify, that the ancient apparition will grow younger and stronger as eternity's end draws nigh. His grip of ice will bring all matter to a stop, his image will cast a light too terrible to behold. An apparition no longer. Alchemist earns extra gold from unit kills and bounty runes. The sacred science of chemistry was a dark brew family tradition, but no dark brew had ever shown the kind of creativity, ambition, and recklessness of young Razzle. However, when adulthood came calling, he pushed aside the family trade to try his hand at manufacturing gold through alchemy. In an act of audacity befitting his reputation, Razzle announced he would transmute an entire mountain into gold. Following 2 decades of research and spending in preparation, he failed spectacularly, quickly finding himself imprisoned for the widespread destruction his experiment wrought. Yet Razzle was never one to take a setback lightly, and sought escape to continue his research. When his new cellmate turned out to be a fierce ogre, he found just the opportunity he needed. After convincing the ogre not to eat him, Razzle set about carefully concocting a tincture for it to drink, made from the molds and mosses growing in the prison stonework. In a week's time, it seemed ready. When the ogre drank the potion, it flew into an unstoppable berserker rage, destroying the cell bars and exploding through walls and guards alike. They soon found themselves lost somewhere in the forest surrounding the city, with a trail of wreckage in their wake and no signs of pursuit. In the tonic's afterglow, the ogre seemed serene, happy, and even eager. Resolving to work together, the pair set off to collect the materials needed to attempt Razzle's alchemic transmutation once more. Nature's Prophet. Able to teleport to any location on the map at will. When Veridisha, goddess of the woods, had finished filling in the green places, having planted the coiled-up spirit in the seed, having lured the twining waters from deep within the rock, having sworn the sun its full attention to the growing things, she realized that her own time had reached its end, and like one of the leaves whose fate she had imprinted in the seed, she would fall without seeing the fruiting of her dream. It pained her to leave the world bereft, for the sprouts had not yet broken through the soil and they would be tender and vulnerable to every sort of harm. She found in her seed pouch one last seed that she had missed in the sowing. She spoke a single word into the seed and swallowed it as she fell. Her vast body decomposed throughout the long winter, becoming the humus that would feed the seedlings in the spring. And on the morning of the vernal equinox, before the rest of the forest had begun to wake, that last seed ripened and burst in an instant. From it stepped nature's prophet, in full leaf, strong and wise, possessing Veridish's power to foresee where he would be needed most in defense of the green places and any who might be fortunate enough to call him an ally. Omnic Knight. Tanky frontliner who protects and heals his allies. Purist Thunderwrath was a hard-fighting, road-worn, deeply committed knight, sworn to the order in which he had grown up as squire to elder knights of great reputation. He had spent his entire life in the service of the Omniscience, the all-seeing one. Theirs was a holy struggle, and so embedded was he in his duty that he never questioned it so long as he had the strength to fight and the impetuous valor that comes with youth. But over the long years of the crusade, as his elders passed away and were buried in sorry graves at the side of muddy tracks, as his bond brothers fell in battle to uncouth creatures that refused to bow to the omniscience, as his own squires were chewed away by ambush and plague and bad water, he began to question the meaning of his vows, the meaning of the whole crusade. After deep meditation, he parted ways with his army and commenced a long trek back to the cave-riddled cliffs of Emaracus, and there he set a challenge to the priests of the omniscience. No knight had ever questioned them before, and they tried to throw him into the pit of sacrifice, but Purist would not be moved. For as he faced them down, he began to glow with a holy light, and they saw that the omniscience had chosen to reveal itself to him. The elder Hierophant led him on a journey of weeks down into the deepest chamber, the Holy of Holies, where waited not some abstract concept of wisdom and insight, not some carved relic requiring an injection of imagination to believe in, but the Old One itself. It had not merely dwelt in those rocks for billions of eons, no, it had created them. The omniscience had formed the immense mineral shell of the planet around itself, as a defense against the numerous terrors of space. Thus the all-seeing one claimed to have created the world, and given the other truths revealed to Purist on that day, the knight had no reason to refute the story. Perhaps the omniscience is a liar, deep in its prison of stone, and not the world's creator at all, but Omni-Knight never again questioned his faith. His campaign had meaning at last. And there can be no question that the glorious powers that imbue him, and give his companions such strength in battle, are real beyond any doubt. Phoenix heals and damages at the sacrifice of its own health. Alone across an untouched darkness gleamed the keeper's first sun, a singular point of conscious light fated to spread warmth into the empty void. Through eons beyond count, this blinding beacon set to coalescing its incalculable energy before bursting forth the cataclysmic flare of supernova. From this inferno raced new beacons, star progeny identical to its parent, who journeyed an unlit ocean and settled in constellatory array. In time, they too would be made to propagate through supernova flame. So would this dazzling cycle of birth and rebirth repeat until all skies hewn of Titan toil deigned to twinkle and shine. By this ageless crucible the star that mortals would come to call Phoenix collapsed into being, and like its ancestors was thrust into an endless cosmos to find a place among its stellar brethren. Yet curiosity toward that which the dimming elders comfort in the darkness consumed the fledgling, and so over long cycles it inquired and studied. It learned that among worlds both whole and broken would soon stir a nexus of remarkable variety locked in an enduring conflict of cosmic consequence, a plane which would find itself in need of more influence than a dying sun's distant rays could provide. Thus this infant son of suns took terrestrial form, eagerly traveling to shine its warmth upon those who may need it most, and perhaps seize upon its solar destiny. Shadow Shaman summons powerful serpent wards to deal damage. Born in the bleeding hills, Rasta was just a starving youngling when picked up by a traveling conman. For 2 pins of copper, the old conman would tell your fortune. For 3, he'd castrate your pig. For 5, he'd circumcise your sons. For a good meal, he'd don his shaman garb, read from his ancient books, and lay a curse upon your enemies. His strange new youngling, part hill troll, part something else, worked as assistant and lent an air of the exotic to the conman's trade. Always one step ahead of cheated customers, one town ahead of a pursuing patronage, the two trekked across the blighted lands until one day the conman realized that the little youngling could actually do what he only pretended at. His ward had a gift that customers valued. And so the youngling Rasta was thrust before the crowds, and the trade name Shadow Shaman was born. The two continued from town to town, conjuring for money as Shadow Shaman's reputation grew. Eventually, the pair's duplicitous past caught up with them, and they were ambushed by a mob of swindled ex-clients. The conman was slain, and for the first time, Rasta used his powers for darkness, massacring the attackers. He buried his beloved master, and now uses his powers to destroy any who would seek to do him harm. Shadow Demon stacks exponential poison damage against his foes. Among the sovereign demons with explicit access to this world, Doom scarcely bothers with the affairs of non-infernals and lesser spectral consorts, while Shadow Fiend passes through almost exclusively on collecting expeditions. The Shadow Demon, however, has always taken a deep and abiding interest in the material plane, as if sensing that mastery of this gritty dimensional nexus might be the key to total domination of all realities. Summoned first by minor wizards, the Shadow Demon granted every wish and put on increasingly impressive displays of power until he had the full attention of the greatest demonologists, and through them the various lords, tyrants, autarchs and hierophants who depended on sorcery to buttress their mundane power. So great was his deception that all his summoners considered themselves the master and Shadow Demon the servant. Meanwhile, he eroded their identities and made their minds his own. In the end, most members of the cult were hollow puppets, extensions of his evil will. What Shadow Demon's next step would have been remains open to speculation, for around this time, nevermore the Shadow Fiend bit into a particularly nasty-tasting soul and discovered that it held nothing but a foul nougat of Shadow Demon's essence. Alerted that a coup was underway, and that the ancient equilibrium of the Umbral Pact was about to be destabilized, Doom and Shadow Fiend briefly joined forces to destroy the burgeoning cult. Combining spells of incredible force, they undid Shadow Demon's centuries of patient work, reducing his cult to smithereens and all its members to a bloody splatter. Nothing remained except a tiny speck of demon shadow. Immortal and irreducible, this mode of evil was enough to seed the Shadow Demon's next scheme, and in fits and starts, over further centuries, he began to regroup. Whatever that speck of shadow touched, it tainted, and its influence gradually grew. A chaos of damaged parts pulled together, re-knit, and combined to give Shadow Demon a form even stronger than his former. He is all but complete now, and his plan for infinite dominion lacks all of its former weaknesses. It would seem that such a being of pure malice and malevolence, a threat to all creation, would be forever out of place in our world, yet Shadow Demon does not lack for followers. Rubik steals the spells of his enemies to use against them. Any mage can cast a spell or two, and a few may even study long enough to become a wizard, but only the most talented are allowed to be recognized as a magus. Yet as with any sorcerer's circle, a sense of community has never guaranteed competitive courtesy. Already a renowned duelist and scholar of the grander world of sorcery, it had never occurred to Rubik that he might perhaps be magus material until he was in the midst of his 7th assassination attempt. As he casually tossed the 12th of a string of would-be killers from a high balcony, it dawned on him how utterly unimaginative the attempts on his life had become. Where once the interruption of a finger snap or fire hand might have put a cheerful spring in his step, it had all become so very predictable. He craved greater competition. Therefore, donning his combat mask, he did what any wizard seeking to ascend the ranks would do. He announced his intention to kill a magus. Rubik quickly discovered that to threaten one magus is to threaten them all, and they fell upon him in force. Each antagonist's spell was an unstoppable torrent of energy, and every attack a calculated killing blow. But very soon something occurred that Rubik's foes found unexpected. Their arts appeared to turn against them. Inside the magic maelstrom, Rubik chuckled, subtly reading and replicating the powers of one in order to cast it against another, sowing chaos among those who had allied against him. Accusations of betrayal began to fly, and soon the sorcerers turned one upon another without suspecting who was behind their undoing. When the battle finally drew to a close, all were singed and frozen, soaked and cut and pierced. More than one lay dead by an ally's craft. Rubik stood apart, sore but delighted in the week's festivities. None had the strength to argue when he presented his petition of assumption to the hidden Queen of Pain. Blinks in to deal massive magical damage. The ecclesiast king of elves nursed a desire for pain-forbidden pain. In a less prominent political figure, such desires might be considered unwise, but in a monarch of his stature, to satisfy such thirsts would have threatened the virtue of the divine throne itself. Therefore he turned to his dungeon full of demonologists, promising freedom to whoever could summon a personal succubus of torment and bind it entirely to his service. The creature who arrived, Akasha by name, visited upon him such exquisite torments that he named her his secret queen, and he began to spend all his spare moments submitting to her clever torments, eventually abdicating all his responsibilities in his pursuit of the painful pleasures that only she could bring. Queen of Pain could bring him to the brink of death, but she was rune-bound to keep him alive. At last the king's neglect of state brought on an uprising. He was dragged from his chamber and hurled from the Tower of Invocations, and at the moment of death, Queen of Pain was let loose into the world, freed from servitude, freed to visit her sufferings on anyone she deigned to notice. Kunkka disrupts enemy positioning and disables them. As the admiral of the mighty Kladish navy, Kunkka was charged with protecting the isles of his homeland when the demons of the cataract made a concerted grab at the lands of men. After years of small sorties, and increasingly bold and devastating attacks, the demon fleet flung all its carnivorous ships at the trembling isle. Desperate, the suicide mages of Clad committed their ultimate rite, summoning a host of ancestral spirits to protect the fleet. Against the demons, this was just barely enough to turn the tide. As Kunkka watched the demons take his ships down one by one, he had the satisfaction of wearing away their fleet with his ancestral magic. But at the battle's peak, something in the clash of demons, men and atavistic spirits must have stirred a fourth power that had been slumbering in the depths. The waves rose up in towering spouts around the few remaining ships, and Maelron the Tentacular appeared amid the fray. His tendrils wove among the ships, drawing demon and human craft together, churning the water and wind into a raging chaos. What happened in the crucible of that storm, none may truly say. The cataract roars off into the void, deserted by its former denizens. Kunkka is now the admiral of but one ship, a ghostly rig which endlessly replays the final seconds of its destruction. Whether he died in that crash is anyone's guess. Not even Tidehunter, who summoned Maelron, knows for sure. Keeper of the Light provides instant mana to allies. Upon a pale horse he rides, this spark of endless suns, this keeper of the light. Ezzelur long ago escaped the fundamental plane, separating from the other ancient forces to which he was bound within the great primordial harmony. He is a power grown sentient in the dawn of the universe, and now rides forth in all planes at once, one step ahead of pursuing chaos, bearing his gift with him at the end of a radiant staff. His majestic truth lies hidden beneath the outward appearance of a slightly doddering old man who barely stays in the saddle. However, when faced with the challenge of chaos, or the forces of darkness, his primordial light bursts forth, and his full power is revealed, transforming him once again into a force to be reckoned with. Husker sacrifices his health to deal more damage. Emerging from the throes of the sacred Nothal realm, Husker opened his eyes to see the prodigal shadow priest Dazzle working a deep incantation over him. Against the ancient rites of the Dazun order, Husker's spirit had been saved from eternity, but like all who encounter the Nothal, he found himself irrevocably changed. No longer at the mercy of a mortal body, his very lifeblood became a source of incredible power. Every drop spilled was returned tenfold with a fierce, burning energy. However, this newfound gift infuriated Husker, for in his rescue from the Nothal, Dazzle had denied him a place among the gods. He had been denied his own holy sacrifice. In time, the elders of the order sought to expand their influence, and Husker, they agreed, would be a formidable tool in their campaign. Yet becoming a mere weapon for the order that denied him his birthright only upset him further. As the first embers of war appeared on the horizon, he fled his ancestral home to find new allies, all the while seeking a cause worthy of unleashing the power his total sacrifice could bring. Hoodwink shackles her enemies to trees. Hoodwink's earliest years were spent in the idyllic expanse of green that once filled the edges of Crimwall. But as that kingdom grew, and the needs of both her citizens and her armies became ravenous, rival Oran timber barons scratched and clawed to outpace each other in devouring the natural beauty of the border forests. gorging themselves to meet the demands of the changing land. To those living in the ancient timberlands, the choice came down to following the line of refugees into the pacified zones, falling to Krimwol's black powder and steel while defending their homes, or fleeing further north to tempt fate in the haunted glens and groves of the misty wood Tomokan. So it was in those treacherous northern mistwoods that Hoodwink came of age, dodging the horrific predators of the Tomokan, ingratiating herself with some of the local banditry whilst antagonizing others, and finding absolutely every which way to be underfoot whenever some interesting mischief arose, often allegedly the cause of it. But when the faintest whiff of Krimwol's fires eventually drifted into her adopted home, Hoodwink's thoughts turned to any family and friends who might have survived the invasion now made to eke out lives in the raised lands whose wounds scarred her very soul, and she couldn't help but approach the edges of civilization to get a glimpse of the devils that had destroyed her old life. There, she saw that the monsters from her childhood weren't monsters at all. They were just people. Soldiers, laborers, merchants, and refugees. And the soldiers, even with their black powder and steel, were nothing compared to the dangers of the Tomokan, real dangers with tentacles and teeth, dangers she danced around like a twirling maple seed. Knowing she can always find safe passage in the tangles of the Tomokan, where most warm-blooded folk wisely fear to tread, Hoodwink now strikes out against those who dare try to further pacify the wilds, happily taking what she likes from their belongings, destroying what she has no use for, and helping guide any kindred survivors back to a life in the green once again. Pudge hooks and pulls enemies towards him. In the fields of endless carnage, far to the south of Koij, a corpulent figure works tirelessly through the night, dismembering, disemboweling, piling up the limbs and viscera of the fallen that the battlefield might be clear by dawn. In this cursed realm, nothing can decay or decompose. No corpse may ever return to the earth from which it sprang, no matter how deep you dig the grave. Flocked by carrion birds who need him to cut their meals into beak-sized chunks, Pudge the Butcher hones his skills with blades that grow sharper the longer he uses them. Swish, swish, thunk. Flesh falls from the bone, tendons and ligaments part like wet paper. And while he always had a taste for the butchery, over the ages, Pudge has developed a taste for its byproduct as well. Starting with a gobbet of muscle here, a sip of blood there, before long he was thrusting his jaws deep into the toughest of torsos, like a dog gnawing at rags. Even those who are beyond fearing the Reaper, fear the Butcher. Primal Beast stomps over everything and smashes enemies into messy bits. Though the deterioration of the Mistwood and its evolution from idyllic expanse to death-filled Tanglewild was a slow, wizard-fueled process, most scholars agree the true beginning of the end was marked by the interdimensional arrival of the primal beast. A creature hatched into an existence devoid of all feeling but hunger and pain, eons of carnage shaped the primal beast into the apex predator on a planet filled with violent terrors. Desperately banished by would-be masters with failed hopes to control him, the beast was cast into a new world, one where he could ascend from mere hungry predator into an invasive killing machine with nothing able to stand in his way. For thousands of years, the Mistwood served as massive stomping ground for the beast's destructive play, and even the feared Durana beasts made for tasty snacks. Indeed, there could be no rivals for the beast's territory, only minor annoyances. Until one such tiny annoyance employed vile trickery to trap the unstoppable beast in the Gleipnir. There he might have remained subdued for eternity, were it not for the unpredictable powers of the Continuum device. Now, freed from both Gleipnir and Vault, far afield from the Mistwood, and much closer to inhabited lands, the beast sets his snout towards new slaughters and the delights of savage destruction, and the paltry fires of civilization will do little to keep this ageless monster at bay. Night Stalker. Empowered by the shadows of nightfall. Of the Night Stalker, there is no history, only stories. There are ancient tales woven into the lore of every race and every culture, of an impossible time before sunlight and daytime, when night reigned alone and the world was covered with the creatures of darkness, creatures like Balinor the Night Stalker. It is said that on the dawn of the first day, all the night creatures perished. All, that is, save one. Evil's embodiment, Night Stalker delights in his malevolence. He created the primal role of the night terror, the boogeyman, and as long as there have been younglings, his is the specter summoned to terrify them. This is a role he relishes, nor are these empty theatrics. He does indeed stalk the unwary, the defenseless, those who have strayed beyond the lighted paths or denied the warnings of their communities. Night Stalker serves as living proof that every child's worst nightmare is true. Ogre Magi uses a touch of luck to amplify his skills. The ordinary ogre is the creature for whom the phrase "as dumb as a bag of rock hammers" was coined. In his natural state, an ogre is supremely incapable of doing or deciding anything. Clothed in dirt, he sometimes finds himself accidentally draped in animal skins after eating lanekill. Not an especially social creature, he is most often found affectionately consorting with the boulders or tree stumps he has mistaken for kin, a factor that may explain the ogre's low rate of reproduction. However, once every generation or so, the ogre race is blessed with the birth of a two-headed ogre magi, who is immediately given the traditional name of Agron Stonebreak, the name of the first and perhaps only wise ogre in their line's history. With two heads, Ogre Magi finds it possible to function at a level most other creatures manage with one. And while the Ogre Magi will win no debates, even with itself, it is graced with a divine quality known as dumb luck, a propensity for serendipitous strokes of fortune which have allowed the ogre race to flourish in spite of enemies, harsh weather, and an inability to feed itself. It's as if the goddess of luck, filled with pity for the sadly inept species, has taken Ogre Magi under her wing. And who could blame her? Poor things.